All right, this may be a good time for me to ask WCL to come up and just talk a little bit about our CAFA and where we may be on that. As you know, one of the things I was pretty adamant about trying to make sure we did on time this year was having that audit prepared. But I'm going to let Mr. Lindhart talk a little bit about that. And I challenged him to, can we get this done, knowing of the situations that we're dealing with. And unfortunately, in cooperating with the FBI, they have actually taken some of our documents that we need to actually complete our audit, of which myself and Dr. Bonton, as late as Friday, again reiterated that we need that information. And we even offered to send some of our own staff to copy it so that we can get it. But anyway, I wanted to talk about maybe a little timeline and about the audit process and where we're going to be in terms of trying to complete that over the next few weeks. Okay, Bill?
Basically, your audit for purposes of submission to the state for reporting purposes was likely to be late. January 28th of this year is the deadline for submission, and obviously there's no expected capability by the external auditor to complete it by that date, since he lacks, as the superintendent said, a large portion of the information was taken by the federal authorities in November. So what you have in front of you is just kind of a summary of starting with that situation. You see some of the potential consequences there. Obviously, being late requires a filing with TEA. That also potentially raises you and elevates the potential for scrutiny in our eyes, not only in this area, but potentially in others. It puts federal state grant authorities on notice. They'll be questioning whether funds are being spent properly and whether future grants should be awarded to the district, as well as your credit rating agencies who rate your bonds and other debt instruments. If you don't submit an audit to them in conjunction with the bond covenants, then there's potential penalties that occur from that. And that's likely in terms of higher rates to pay for that debt, either current or future. So what we've outlined is basically you have two options ahead of you. One is you can sit back and wait for the auditor to get that information from the feds, not knowing what their time frame is. As the superintendent said, several requests have been made for that information and no response has been forthcoming. Or the alternative is to say, let's go back as if we were facing this at year end and recreate all the information we prepared for the auditor once and don't have, and we will prepare that information a second time from scratch, hopefully before the spring break period, so that the auditor can then renew his efforts to review the information and complete an audit, regardless of what the opinion is on the audit. Then that way you can file that with the appropriate authorities and have that complete. So this was just put this in front of you for discussion, understanding, etc. I'd be happy to address any questions regarding it.
Mr. Mike.
Thank you. When you talk about going back and preparing from scratch, in order to prepare from scratch, you have to know where you're at scratch. Do we even know where we're at? I mean, do we even have a foundation?
We have all the information. We have all the information that is existing in the system from which the initial information was prepared and given to the auditor. We have his request for information. We'll build from that with the staff to generate that from within the system, whatever documents we have to associate with that, such as your bank records and things of that.
So you're talking about going back and depending on, and this is not at you, by the way, this is going back and depending on numbers that the two people who have been indicted provided to us, correct?
That is correct. We have some indication from our current work as to where a lot of that money was transferred in and out of, so we have at least some beginning points. We've identified some of that information, so we at least have a start where we can at least separate some of that out. Will it be all of it? Not necessarily.
Well, I just think that it's a great, and thank you for the answer. I just think it's a great concern for us to go back and have to depend on the numbers from those two individuals, but I'm sure that's not a concern you don't have, so.
Well, it's obviously a concern, otherwise we'd be giving you more comprehensive financial data
Right.
today. But the issue is, it's important that you file something, even if you have to come back later in subsequent years and restate it if you had to. But you need to make sure, for the purposes that's outlined in the one-page summary we gave you, that there are consequences of not having anything. So the idea here is, let's try to comply with what the requirements are, even if we're getting a, opinion that isn't clean and so forth. That may still have some consequences, but at least we've gone through the effort of getting some financial information to those entities.
Okay, I'm just throwing out my thought. I would rather give nothing than give something that we're not 100% behind. That's just.
I understand. I understand. That's why we painted two options: do nothing or.
No, I understand. I appreciate that. And again, that's not a shot at anyone
No.
working out. It's,
I appreciate that. My recommendation would be to go back and recreate the information.
If I could, I will say this, we're almost required as a governmental agency to produce some type of audit. So,
If I might add, I think, and no disrespect to anybody else's opinion, but I think if you do go back and recreate it, it shows a good faith effort on the part of the district to try to comply as best as possible, even if all the information isn't as accurate as you would like it to be.
Mr. President, I'm sorry, Mr. Reeves.
I would like to know, is there some provision that the state has that allows us to submit by the 28th a document with a note or a proviso attached that says will be revised or current or whatever after?
There's a procedure that allows the district, or requires the district basically to say, we will file a late audit. We draft a letter under the guidelines by the state for the superintendent's signature, if indeed there is no audit at that appropriate time, and then that can be submitted. That doesn't do you anything other than tell TEA that we aren't going to be on time with the audit. It doesn't give you any penance or any relief from anything. It just says we're going to be late.
That's like an extension on our taxes.
No, there's no extension. All it does is say we're going to be late. The agency isn't grant extensions. They just say we have to submit an audit. It has to be submitted by this time of year. And as a consequence, if we aren't going to submit one, we have to notify them of that. And that's what that's prepared to do. So then after that, the issue is how long after that before you want to submit something.
Mr. Reeves.
Thank you, Madam President. I totally agree that we need to send something in. Instead of wait. I mean, we've had enough going on around here. So I had to go over that opinion. That opinion is send something in. We have something. Send it in. Like Mr. Sonic said. You can add to it later on if they allow you, but to send nothing in, I don't think that would work very well with TAs at this point.
Either way, you're going to have consequences. I think my recommendation would be to recreate the information because the consequences will be lessened ultimately by making good faith effort and going forward rather than not knowing what the timing might be of getting information back from the federal authorities. And that's not a criticism of them, it's just they have their job in a separate part, so they need the information for whatever their purposes are. But you have an option of doing something else. And like I say, just notifying TA it's going to be late is just one thing, that's all it does. So then the idea is, what do you do to go back and recreate the information that's needed for the auditor? Now, all this does is says we're going to create the information and give it to your external auditor. It doesn't say that in that 6 or 7 weeks that we use to prepare that, using your staff to assist us, doesn't mean that then the audit is finished. That just starts the process over again as if they were coming in September to begin their audit process. So then it could be several months beyond that when the auditor takes his time to to look at that information and make sure that that information is complete and thorough. So we're not looking at 6 or 7 weeks to submission, we're probably looking to several months after that. And I don't want to, estimate what his time may be for the review, but there's going to be that period would be the normal audit process that follows that.
We need to get started on it. Do that, we need to get some information as requested.
No, it's just discussion.
Mr. Tom, do you have something?
So, my question is, even if it, would it be what we would send in the 28th, would it be incomplete?
It'll just be a one-page letter, just notifying under the provisions, the TA has exactly what is occurring and that we will be late in filing the audit.
It's a requirement.
Yes. It's part of their policies and procedures that say, in the absence of submitting an audit, you must do the following. And so this just puts them on notice that we aren't going to submit on time.
Okay, now you really have me confused because I was understanding that we were going to send something in.
No, the required submission is a letter just stating that we're going to be late, because January 28th is the date by which the audit is supposed to be submitted. And what we prepared is a letter for the superintendent, and we talked with the auditor. He has no timetable for the completion of the audit at this point in time because he has insufficient information. So the idea is you must comply by saying to TA, we will be late. There won't be anything attached to that. What would be ultimately what we're, if you went forward and wanted to recreate the information, then we would generate the information that the auditor could use to then prepare the audit report, and sometime subsequent to that, that you would then be in greater control of the timing of the submission than you are on waiting for the return of that information. And if the federal authorities during the next several weeks return that information, then he can begin his work even sooner, and we don't have to go through that exercise.
Thank you.
Yeah, that brings up one of the information items that we're going to have to consider. And he's a professional services, but this is going to again extend the services of the auditor because we've made a good faith effort to retrieve those materials and of which we've not received. So we'll be talking about having to expand his services so that we can deal with that, the issue that we don't have all of our information. Also, I guess before we get into those other items, I'll tell you what, before we get into those other reports, I'll bring you all back up. Let me kind of conclude my report. I did want to tell you all there is some good news going on in Beaumont ISD. And I wanted to make sure we ended on some good news in my report. I just received word that we had 7 BISD senior football players who named to the 2014 Texas High School Coaches Association. In order for them to do that, they had to meet these 3 criteria. Be a student athlete in good standing with the team at the time of the nomination. Must be of good moral character. And 3, must have an overall grade point average of 92 or above. And those students, 4 from Central, Ian Bramble, Derek Broussard, Mom and Dad was there. Yeah, they're the prize back. Kaman Darby and Zach Griffith Guidry. And of course, if any of those parents are here, even though we didn't invite you to be here, you're welcome to stand. And from Westbrook, 3 recipients, Josh Hicks, Clint Kelly, and James Reed. So we're extremely proud of those students. Also, we had a blood drive, or we'll host a blood drive on January 28th from 10 to 2. And so if any of you community members, all board members want to participate in that, we encourage you to do that. And I'm telling you, well, Mr. Williams, I'll let, because did I see you there? Or did you miss the elementary basketball tournament? Well, man, tell us about the tournament. Okay. Well, I did see the championship game, but what did you think about our elementary basketball team?
a little gym that you built. That we built, it's too small.
Anybody?
Yeah. No, it was really well attended with all the parents, and it was a rotation. But they wouldn't leave. They would stay, and they were crammed up. So they were kind of uncomfortable when I was walking around.
Well, I'm glad you were able to participate. I did get to make it out on Saturday to see the final championship. And yeah, I know you need, I had a bunch of other stuff going on Saturday too. Let me start with the consolation prize went to Phil Price. Is Phil Price the principal? Third place went to Charlton Pollard. Is anybody from Charlton Pollard? Second place went to Peach MacArthur. And I must say that this principal came back, even though he didn't win, to actually congratulate the winning team. And the winning team was actually Homer Drive, the Homer Drive Bobcats. So the elementary tournament was outstanding. And then also I want to let you know, I'll be attending the Rotary on January 22nd. Ms. Miles and maybe a few others. We're honoring 11 of our BISD students, or the Rotary is honoring 11 of our students that participated in the Youth Leaders Academy. And I think, according to them, this was a tremendous honor, and that approximately 300 students from the Rotary District attended the event. So there is some good news going on in your district. And of course, our students are doing a great job. That does conclude my report.
Dr. Shackelford, before we do leave your report, I know going back a little bit, but I do want to make sure that we're clear on your mentioning of this of the chamber and the audit committee. Okay, so this is going to be the advisory committee that
Well,
we talked
Bill-
about.
Yes, we'll meet with Bill and Chuck and Dr. Bonton, Jim, Chuck Colbrenner, Nathan Cross. I think many of you know him and respect him. He's a local auditor. And we're going to talk about what that'll look like.
Okay.
But in some of the reports today, you'll see, I want, as Bill is presenting, to make it in such a way that we can measure and monitor. And then when he ends here, we're going to talk about, well, what have we done since all this has happened? Well, there are 6 critical things that we've done and put in place that I'll have Bill, of course, emphasize when we conduct his report. But we also want the community to know that we live in a fishbowl. And so we're not going to be hiding or trying to hide anything in terms of how it relates to managing the taxpayers' resources. And so we do have some people in the community that are interested in participating in this.
Yeah, that's the piece that I really wanted to get out there, because we have been talking about community engagement and involvement and being transparent. So the way to make that happen, the way that I look at it, then create this advisory board for oversight and to monitor and include the community. Okay, so now, you know, the taxpayers are here watching the money too. All right, so you're going to be much more apt, and I'm not naive enough to think that we're going to trust everybody and it's all going to be kumbaya and everything. So we want the community involved to see what's happening, so that you can trust a Nathan Cross or a Jim Rich. Okay, so that's how, in my opinion, you start to make that that happen. So you know, we pledge that community engagement, involvement, being transparent, and this is the way we think that we can start to take those steps. So I just wanted to make sure that got out there
I
clear.
think you made it clear, President.
So I think you still have the floor.
Well, I've concluded, well, just, you reiterated that we are reaching out to the community for that, and we've been doing that. Of course, many of our community know we've had some issues come up. But Jim and I had that conversation back this summer. And of course, it went from LBB to TEA, and then FBI, Now we have, as I shared with you all earlier, everybody, wants to create their own deal. But what we want the community to know is this is our school district. This is your district just as well as mine. I pay taxes here, you pay taxes here. And we're going to get this right. We are going to get this right. I am not satisfied with the way things have gone. I don't like it, just like you don't like it. I spend, I don't know how many waking hours dealing with issue after issue after issue. But we are going to get it right. We're going to get it right. And we're going to hold people accountable. You're going to do what you're supposed to do. And we need the community involved in doing that. And I think we've created some systems out there where we've allowed people to have their comments. Now the deal is, once you give your comment or opinion, it does not mean we're going to take it and run with it as if God spoke. But it is important to us, and it is a process. So we do want the community involved, and I pledge to get it right. We have to. It's important that we do so. I made this statement earlier, and I didn't know it was prophetic, Mr. Williams, but I said it's not easy. But our children are worth it. And the joy of what we do in terms of educating our children, that's extremely worth it. And so we're going to make this happen, and we're going to do it together.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we've come to that part of the agenda where we try to create our consent agenda. Ms. Bush?
Thank you, Madam President. The first item listed on our general consent items is letter A, discuss the 2013-2014 general fund budget and accept the special revenue budget amendments as seen in Exhibit A.
Okay, Mr. Lenhart, Mr. Yapel, if you would come forward. Also, they have a beautiful young lady with them today that's, we're going to be talking a little bit about.
Emphasis on young, I might add.
Yes. How we're going to improve the purchasing process, or at least consider some better procedures in place to do that. I know Mike Gill and I have spent lots of time talking about that as well. So they'll be introducing Colleen, I'm not quite sure I would say. You'll get to hear from her tonight too about some processes that we want to put in place as well. Okay.
So we continue to try to get to you financial information. We had a short month of being a week of closing out. So by next month, hopefully these will be linked to your system on Friday so you can have access to these reports. But I wanted to go over them with you just briefly. Same format as you saw last month. Your first page there gives you the year-to-date budget comparison, not only revenues, but expenditures. Just a couple of points that you might notice. The Exxon Mobil payment within the free trade zone was reduced by $4 million due to a change in the calculation of that property tax in lieu of. So you see that $4 million reduction in revenues, which reduces your estimated revenues for the year from 154 to 150. If you recall, you had a $3 million deficit budget, to which you've already added several $100,000 in budget amendments year to date. So if you look at the far right there, you're looking right now at a projected shortfall of just over 7.3 million. And again, on the right, we've done some analysis. The amendments this month are a zero sum. In other words, there's no net gain or loss to any of those amendments. It just shows you where they come from. The second page shows you, remember last month we did first quarter analysis in comparison to last year's expenditures to see where you stood. We've added December. And if you look to the far right, there you see in negative numbers at the lower end, a negative 422,000. That means you were under the spending pace of last year in terms of total dollars by just over 400,000. And to the right there, under the variances, the analysis, some of the key items there, you can see what we think has influenced those items, such as greater energy conservation, heightened legal fees. And if you notice in that function 41 there, it also says wire transfers, and you understand what that's for. The third page shows your accounts in Texpool and Lone Star primarily. And next month, we'll come to you with a comparison of where you stand in these two this year versus last year, so you can see the standing at this point in time of your available cash in your various investment pools. And finally, the last page deals with an analysis of your spending pattern year-to-date this year versus last year. And while you are $400,000 plus below the gross total for last year, you are spending at a faster pace than you did last year. And at the bottom, you'll note that in conclusion, if you continue to spend just at last year's pace for the rest of this year, you will add another $1.25 million to that deficit. That's assuming you expend at last year's pace. If you increase it, it will be more. And we've highlighted by month where you've had some of the biggest expenditures, and we will continue to analyze those and prepare some options for the superintendent to review and present to you if spending needs to be reduced. So that's the financial information presented tonight. Is there any question or comment I can respond to?
Mr. Tom Neely.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. Well, I'd recommend that we start immediately with any spending freezes tonight. And that we look real hard, real quick at cuts. This is unbelievable. And I don't think we need to be waiting around another month or two trying to get ideas. I think we need to implement something immediately till we get our feet on the ground and make some really good decisions. That's just my opinion on this.
Mr. Mike Neal.
To summarize what I think you just told us, we just lost $4 million. Not
Correct.
to our fault,
No,
but we just had $4 million taken out of our coffers,
correct.
our anticipated.
Anticipated revenues for the year, yes.
It's good news, thank you. You're the messenger, aren't you?
I've been shot many times, that's why I'm wearing a red sweater.
I understand. And if we continue to spend at the pace we're at, we're going to be an additional $1.25 million over budget.
In addition to the 7.3 you already are.
I was going to get there, thank you. I wanted to deliver that.
Sorry.
That's okay. So we're looking at almost $8.5 million.
Correct.
That we would, unless we do something, I would assume have to go into the general fund to fund it, correct?
You'd have to go to fund balance. At this point in time, I can't tell you what that number is.
One of the problems, I think.
Right. But that's one of the things we've come out of trying to recreate the data would be to get at least a better estimate. Because we've got 3 or 4 estimates that are $10 million apart right now of what the fund balance is. So I'm hesitant to even put any of those numbers on the table.
No, I appreciate that, because I really need to drown myself prematurely. And when you said administration line 41, wire transfers, have we taken in, and I may have asked you this last month, I'm not sure, if we accounted, back up, it's alleged that $4 million has been wired out, according to the indictments. I would say alleged. Have we accounted for that in our accounting yet, or is that, is that going through an expense process that we were blind to? Or we still have another $4 million that we need to find?
We've just started accounting for it this year, once the source of the transfer was identified in the bank reconciliations. Remember, the people that were doing the bank reconciliations are also people that are no longer employed.
I understand.
So we've started since September in updating this year, since we didn't have access to all that other information for last year. So we've begun to identify it, and we've set up a line item to identify and to put all that money in that. But what was happening was that transfer was primarily coming through function 41.
Okay. And if my fellow trustees will allow me to ask a couple more questions, I really want to get a couple answers. Dr. Shacklot, on the increased rate of spending, is there something that we've done different this year that we're going to back off of it? It doesn't mean that, some things hadn't been spent early this year that were spent late last year, I would assume. do you know where we're at with that, or are you just now getting information like we are?
Well,
Does that make sense what I'm asking you?
yes, and I'm glad you asked that question. So Bill can explain, when you have more money, when our budget last year was greater. So of course, the percentage of spending per month is going to be less. Since you have fewer dollars this year, even though we're probably spending what we spent last year, the percentage is greater because you have more money.
Because it doesn't necessarily mean we're overspending yet,
Right.
but but my big concern, and this is, I guess, to my fellow trustees, strictly the $4 million that we lost in revenue, we can't just close our eyes, and this is strictly my opinion, without doing anything like Tom said. I think that we need to take some action, and some smart action, not knee-jerk, and I don't think that's what Tom's talking about either. But I think we need to come together as a board in the upper administration and find out what are we doing, you know, if we lost $4 million revenue, you know, something has to be done. And I don't think we sit around for 2 or 3 months to figure out what it is. We're in the hole. And I've said before in the beginning of the budget, I'm not for whatever our funded balance is. I'm not for dipping into any of it. It's low enough as it is. Even if what we were given last year or the last one we got was accurate, we have eaten this fund balance up, and I talked about this in the budget process. I don't think we just absorb another $4 million. So I'm agreeing with Tom, but I doubt that I'm the one who's unfair what's going on. And thank y'all for letting me talk a little bit longer.
Okay, let me clear up, again, the $4 million of ledge and the wiring, that's occurred over about a 4-year period. So, you're talking about the Exxon Mobil. Right, now, as we got those in, yes, we will aggressively look at ways in which to manage what we do have. But again, I appreciate your other question. The reduction or the spending per month is not out of line, it's just that when you have less money, the percentage is greater.
And the 4 million,
I guess $4 million is a shock for all of us. One of the things I don't see on here, and perhaps we are not getting money from that, but I thought we had some funds that were supposed to be coming in on the leases of gas. Is that accounted for at all in here? Are we getting any kind of funds from that?
We are, how?
I can't answer that because I didn't prepare your budget revenue, so I don't know what the assumptions are going into that.
Okay.
So I can't, I'd be happy, you know, we can by the next month have some of that kind of information available to you. But
Okay.
we haven't really looked at revenues, we've been focusing more on the expenditure side.
Yeah, but we need some revenue, so.
Well, your revenue stream is concentrated, you get 80% from the state in the first several months of the year. But your property taxes, the bulk of them come in December and January and into middle of February. So we've stayed away from analyzing that. But you will see added to this, if not next month, the month after that, a cash flow analysis that shows where you stand in terms of how much money you actually do have to spend, what that would look like compared to the spending pattern if you go forward. Because one of our concerns, quite frankly, is making sure that you, the superintendent, and the board are apprised of how those resources appear going forward for the rest of the year.
Okay, well, I would like to get a report of what we have gotten coming in. But I also think that, looking at this, I agree we can't wait to decide what's gonna happen. It may be prudent, of course, now, I'm not an accountant. We have people on the staff that are. We have our superintendent. I think that the direction needs to start there and have a special budget workshop where we can look at where are some areas perhaps that we can look at cutting. Maybe, I hate to say this, but it may be some of the transportation for after-school programs or some of those things that at this point we just can't afford to do, but we need to know, we need to start, I would think, immediately sitting down as a group, starting with recommendations coming from you and then letting the board review those things and see if there are other areas perhaps that we can get into it, because we can't wait much longer. I do realize we're probably gonna have to dip some into the fund balance, but I would appreciate if we could get some direction and leadership from our administration in telling us where's the place to start and have time set aside for us to actually look together at those reports and come up with some ideas and suggestions as well.
Okay.
Thank you for your reports as well.
And Ms. Bush, I'll take that as workshop and sitting, I know this kind of, but we'll find the time for the workshop and get with Dr. Shagwell, we'll sit down and formulate something to come back to you with the workshop and lay it out and see what it is we can do. Mr. Reese?
I don't know why you got me to ask on that first, but
Pass your time.
I want to make sure that I understood what Tom was saying. I think Mike made it clear that there's some things we can't cut. We have on the agenda tonight about EAP, and there's just some things that we can't or should cut. So I think, like Bush said, the workshop identified something.
Okay.
So I think that's pretty.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't,
I just want to be clear on this $4 million deficit. ExxonMobil. Can you kind of go over that again?
there is, you have had a formula that you use for a number of years to calculate that. My understanding is ExxonMobil raised the question as to whether that was being applied appropriately, and they had a new controller come into the facility here. That person indicated they thought it should be calculated this way. The district submitted the information to Mo Casey for review prior to us coming on board, and apparently the opinion from Mo Casey was that indeed the calculation that ExxonMobil had prepared was true and accurate. And so as a consequence, that affected that's the reduction from the prior payments to the current one this year, which I think was approximately $2.5 million.
Okay, so this revenue that is off the table will get.
Correct.
The calculation is always going to be as it is now.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
The last piece of information I want to get to you is the superintendent referred to several times. The first time we made a presentation to you, there were 6 processes that we said we felt needed additional attention. And last month, I think we began to bring you up to date on those. And what I've given you is a summary here, and we've added on a current month. So this goes back all the way to when we started in November, walks you through December, January to date, and plan steps for February. And you'll see it covers their bank accounts, and the bank accounts that weren't reconciled on a timely basis are being done so now. And we anticipate before the end of this month that those will be current. The second page has talking about disbursement review prior to, and this includes wire transfers as well as checks above a certain amount. We put into place a series of processes that require signatures, both by requesting sources as well as approving sources, and those documents have to be available for review by us prior to anything going out. So we tried to control, regardless of the size of any transfers or payments through checks or anything else, that whole disbursements process, and you can see we chose $2,500 above. Okay. In addition to that, we're trying to identify approved vendors and the status of those vendors. The district has received a request from the Texas Education Agency to get vendor identification numbers. That proved to be a difficult task to comply with for a variety of reasons. Staff has been involved with that for a good period of time. What we want to address here is to make sure that the vendors in the system have all the documentation that's necessary here to support not only Texas Education Agency requirements, but also federal reporting requirements, 1099s, federal tax IDs, things of that nature. So we're going through that, and Ms. Wells, who the superintendent is working with, purchasing and contract management folks, and she'll talk a little bit more at the conclusion about this whole area and what our assessment of the status is. Next area is the centralizing of the activity fund accounting and disbursement. I think I responded a little bit last time to a question. We're in the process of preparing a plan to do that. We're right now trying to reconcile all those activity accounts year to date to make sure that they're up to date. What we'll be doing is laying out a plan for the superintendent, visiting with principals as we go forward to make sure they understand what's likely, and hopefully by the beginning of the next school year, have that process in place. And if there's any questions on that, I'd be happy to answer on any of these. And Ms. Wells will be talking a little bit about the next one, about annual bids and moving away from the current process that you use, which is largely catalog bidding without prices and inclusive of discounts for the most part, and the use of cooperatives and so forth. And she'll have some specific comments. She's a former assistant superintendent for purchasing and support services at Cypress Fairbanks. Before that, she was the director of purchasing for that district. So she comes with a plethora of experience in the whole purchasing realm, and she is met today for the second time with the staff there, and will be doing more so going forward. And finally, the last one is about the fixed asset reporting. We have really three issues here that we're dealing with. One is to comply with some audit requirements for an inventory valuation for the prior fiscal year. Mr. Yapel is working on giving a number to the auditor that represents a reasonable expression of that valuation, combined with the corrective action you see here. We plan to bring back to you sometime in the next month or two a request for proposals or a bid response from a vendor to actually conduct, on a contract basis, a review of all the fixed assets and to value those, locate those, tag those within the district, probably in the months of late May, June, and July, when school's not in session or limited session, so we don't disturb the instruction process. That's the second issue. The third issue is the process going forward. I don't think the district has had an inventory evaluation ever, at least not in recent memory, and as a result, we need a process to make sure, once we have identified the current assets, that we don't just let that sit again for 10 years and have to come back and do that. We want to have a process in place that identifies how we accept assets, tag them, put them in the right location, and track them in the accounting system. So that'll be coming to you the next few months. So as the superintendent said, there's a series of things undergoing. We've also taken some internal control steps. We prepare a white paper for the superintendent on a variety of things that just dealt with some of the internal controls. Some of those have been in place, like access to the vault and the safe and so forth, as well as other things that will be going forward that will be bringing, that we brought to his attention and working with him on developing some plans for. So I think there are a lot of good processes in place. The horse is out of the barn, everybody knows that. So we can't go chase a horse, so we want to close the barn door and keep the next horse from going outside the barn. So that's what a lot of these processes are designed to do, is to give you that control. That being said, there's no foolproof solution. We can put in place the best things possible, but if two people want to collude in the positions they were in, there's nothing you can do about it. And fortunately, it was stumbled upon before it got worse. So I think going forward, the more things we can put in place like this, the better off the district will be in the long term. So, any questions I can respond to? Yes, sir.
You mentioned now.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take precedent.
You said we have no inventory,
No,
no mechanism that we have been able to register? Because I know some items have tags on them and scan bars.
you have a method, you have used a method apparently, I'm not quite sure. What I'm saying is you have not, as far back as we can go or find or talk to anybody, we can't determine if there's been a inventory location and valuation process in place. So we're starting basically from scratch, because a lot of those assets, even though they may have been tagged, weren't tracked. So a desk that may have been in ABC Elementary is now in XYZ Elementary. You know, a computer may have been moved, et cetera. I'm not saying that happened, but we have no ongoing process to be able to track where those assets are going. And what I'm talking about here with fixed assets is primarily your capital assets, that's your 5,000 above, but there are other, what you call controllable assets that are below 5,000, laptop, an iPad, or something like that. We also want to make sure are put in the system.
What about like in our maintenance, our parts for buses, tires, out of our transportation, out of our maintenance? What about building materials and goods? Will that all be incorporated into this inventory program?
We can make the scope as wide as we need to. Okay, in other words, whatever we want to consider as an asset that we want to track, typically those are expensed in the system as they occur. You know, you buy a motor and you expense it as you use it. They're not tracked as a capital asset over multiple years. Usually the definition has to be that an asset has a useful life of at least 1 year or greater. So if you use that item within a period of time, it's not included in the fixed assets. Okay, so it has to be ability to have a tangible life. It has to be tangible and have a life of at least 1 year before it qualifies as a fixed asset. Once it's in that, if it's part that's used during the year, then it's expensed in that year as part of your maintenance budget or your transportation budget. It's not considered a fixed asset. It would be something like a desk, you know, or a computer that you're going to use year after year after year that qualifies for some of those sorts of things.
Well, and the only reason I ask is because we buy a lot of, for instance, auto parts. And I know we have a lot of parts at our maintenance shop. And I think it's just because we don't know what we have and where it's at. And then we're just jumping in and going down to the auto store and buying that part.
But again, those aren't your capital assets that would be included in the fixed asset because they're expensed as you buy them. So when you go buy a set of tires or whatever, you're paying for it out of this year's budget, and they don't have a useful life of at least 1 year.
Right, I understand, but I'm just talking about as far as inventory, so you know what you have and where it's at.
And that's the distinction. That's an inventory, not a fixed asset.
I got it.
That-
Great.
Okay,
Thank you.
no problem. And if I wasn't clear, I apologize. I'm sorry. Any other questions?
Anyone else?
We had one last thing on purchasing, but if you have another question on
Well, it
anything.
actually goes back to what you did, what you said earlier, so
No, go on.
Go ahead, because she's going to go through this.
Okay, I just want to clarify my thought, and this goes back to the money, not the dismissal, but the lack of revenue, and something that Mr. Reese said and Mr. Neal said. I know there's things that we can't stop doing, but I think that what Tom was saying was there's a lot of things we can just absolutely freeze today until we decide what to do, whether it's travel, whether it's catering, whether it's anything like that, I think is what you were talking about. Is that correct, Tom? You're not talking about stripping insurance?
No.
And, I mean, to go with what you're saying, obviously, we're not going to cut, I assume, we're not going to cut the AP. But I just want to clarify what I think Tom meant. Where we have discretionary spending, Dr. Shagler, I really hope that we can put a freeze. I just want to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Wells, and we have a multimedia presentation here. So the spotlight's on her, so.
Beyond her, right? How are you? Thank you for giving me a chance to present a little bit this evening. I do want to just add that of my years of experience, I have 35 years in public education, 29 of those was related to the public purchasing field. And it was an area in the school district that I thoroughly cared about and enjoyed my job. You're being the stewards of your taxpayer funds, and I find that to be one that you have to be able to control. But am I doing, are you gonna, okay. So the discussion points, we did just a few to kind of get a little outline together. In public purchasing, there's a Texas Local Government Code that I know you've already been trained about, but there's sections in that Texas Law Bulletin that specifically describe how you can spend public dollars. It gives you the guidelines, it explains what can and can't be done with public funds. So our bidding and our purchasing laws should not be a surprise. As it describes to us how we can bid, how we can award to vendors, how we use those funds, and how they have to be reported to the school board. So that school law bulletin becomes our Bible, if you would, for public purchasing. I see the role of the purchasing function, or the role of the purchasing department as being your person or your department to ensure that products or services that are used or spent in the purchased in the district follow those guidelines. And the purchasing department's role is to make sure those things happen. and procedures have to be in place in order for that to happen. Not only does it follow the bid laws, but it would give you different avenues that the purchasing department would look at to determine, how am I going to give Beaumont the best value for the dollar? Do I bid it? Do I do it on a co-op? How can we best get those goods or services to the school district in the best value? The different kind of contracts that are used, we've got 3 of them listed. One is called just like a specified or item list. If you were going out to buy things that you could readily identify, let's say for your custodial department, if you were going to buy additional equipment, vacuum cleaners, floor machines, all of those kinds of equipment, that's pretty easy to describe. A description, write a specification, and determine what your needs are. Send it out to vendors, let them respond back to you with their prices and their products. Easy to evaluate, and certainly a way you get your best price. There's areas in a school district where you can't go through and identify every line item. And our science departments might be a good example. You spend far more than $50,000 in this school district on science supplies and materials. That means it has to go under some kind of formal bidding process. It would be almost impossible to identify all of the line items that science in elementary, middle, and high school would use. Think of Bunsen burners and the beakers and the specimens and all of those kind of things. If you put a line item bid together, it could be 100 pages, not practical to do. So in those kinds of instances or things to purchase, you would do a catalog bid. And I think from what we see through the history, you've done a number of different catalog bids where you send out a notice to the vendors to say, we're buying these kind of products and services, how can you price those for us? And they generally provide you a response with like a discount from a catalog. That's about the best way you can control those kind of expenditures. There's also, and I think you notice on your agendas that you approve different cooperative purchasing groups or buy boards where they're convenient for school districts to use. They are legal for school districts to use, but they don't always provide you the best value. The cooperatives that are doing the legal part of the bids, they're pulling together many different school districts with their purchasing power from many to try to get the best price. That's not always the best price to you. It is legal and it's convenient, but I think as we're looking at a paradigm shift, that we would look at how to get away from some of those cooperatives and find ways to bid those things for your school district, bring them to you for approval or questions, etc. So I think there's ways to do that. And another type of contract that you will see coming to you, we'll put in a little different category, and those are more like time and materials. If you need to contract for services that are not available in your school district, if it's backhoe service or your maintenance department or fire extinguisher inspection, those aren't kinds of things that you would do typically in your school district. So you have service contracts that you would do also. Excuse me. As we look at the different kinds of contracts, one of the first things that I see that we need to change or recommend to change, and I've worked with your purchasing department and Dr. Covington just to talk through currently our contract terms for your district are 5-year terms. 5 years for a term contract is excessive. If you think about it, what that means is when a bid goes out and the vendor responds in year 1, he is saying that I am willing to sell these products to you at these prices. And if he knows it's a 5-year contract, what do you think he's doing on the first few years? your prices are generally gonna be higher so that the vendor can cover himself for years 3, 4, and 5 and still make money. They're in it to make money. So 5 years is a long time to ask vendors to give you a price, and in honesty, that's not really where you're getting your best price. So you will see that future contracts that come to you will be for maybe a 1-year contract with 2 years addition for a possible renewal. But I don't think we would want to look at anything longer than a 3-year period. It's more work to do bids more frequently, every year or every other year. But if in the end, it's saving the district money, in the long run, that's where we need to be. So as I'm working with your staff, you will see bids and contracts come to you in a little different manner. But hopefully, the goal is to find ways to provide more revenue back to you in your budget instead of spending it on products and services. All right. The next piece, vendor selection for bid awards. The school law bulletin describes how you can evaluate bids and select vendors. No matter what school district you are with, or county or city, it's always desirable to use your local vendors. They are your taxpayers. The bid laws don't exactly let you do that. It's not legal to say we are only going to use local vendors. But in doing things a little differently, you can give your local vendors a little more education in the bidding process. You can give them an advantage for knowing, how do I do business in Beaumont ISD? What do I have to do? How do the bids work? How do contract terms work? What can I do to be part of that? Another piece of that is that when we are doing any kind of evaluation in bids, there's ways to word what you're evaluating to let that be part, let a local vendor be part of that evaluation. There are products or services that you can get that you don't want to contract with somebody that is in Cy-Fair ISD. Why? They're 2 hours away. So there's things that you can write in that are very legal, very logical to say, what is your response time? If you call this place to you today and it's an emergency, how fast can you get to us? What other kind of companies or references are of the same size that you currently use? Where are they? There's questions you can ask that help you identify the best response and the best value in your district. It doesn't mean it will always be a local person, but you can give them enough chance to respond to find out if they are. The one piece in the Texas School Law Bulletin that even mentions local vendors, and there is one way you can do that. It doesn't happen often, but periodically you will have 2 identical vendor responses. If 2 people came back with the same price that said, I will sell this to you for $1,000, and vendor B says, I will sell it to you for $1,000. If they're identical responses, you can take a local vendor over an outside vendor. That's the only place in the school law bulletin that talks about giving local preference. And then the last piece of this, and then we'll entertain questions, in working with your contract management department. I've been working with Dr. Covington, and we've looked a good bit at how some existing contracts are in place, how things are invoiced, how they are tracked, and some of those processes are difficult to work through and extremely time-consuming. So as we've worked with Dr. Covington, I think his time and my time and those who are working with it is, our time is better spent if we are looking at ways to start today and redo some of those contracts. Rebid them, get them on the street with clearer specifications, contract terms, things that we can measure more easily to know that what we're paying on the invoice is exactly what they said that you would be charged. So we're looking at that to redo the terms and conditions and structures of the setup of your different bids and contracts. And I think those things will be very positive in the end for how you award by your votes to do your bids and contracts. Brief, may I?
I just want to add one comment. You'll see the fruition of the changes that she's talking about probably at your March meeting, because the first contract we intend to apply these to will be the vehicle body repair and mechanical work. So that'll be an example of what we would like to suggest as a format, level of specificity, et cetera, detail going forward. So that will be coming to you, and you may see that as you look through those timelines, some reference, but that's what that's gearing to. Okay? Sorry. Thank you for assisting us. Do we have any further questions on that? Or?
Yeah, any questions on that or discussion? Ms. Bush?
I've asked our attorney who is promised to look at minority vendors, female vendors, and I noticed that you were mentioning school law. Is there anything in the state school law that allows for preferences for minority or female-owned businesses or vendors?
Please do go.
That is a local school board decision. The way it's listed in the school law bulletin is identified that if your district is a hub selected or approved policy, then you may do that. So in the state of Texas, there's probably not a large percentage of school districts that pass that policy. And the reason is because in the end, you should be looking for how to get the best value to the district. And how much more do you want to pay for a minority-owned business to have to pay a higher price than one you could get from another business? I think that's the reason there's not such a high percentage. School dollars are few and far between. That would be a local policy.
Tom Neal, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking a lot. No, I'll reserve when they come back.
Okay. All right. Anyone else?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.